Grüß, willkommen in einem Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case part 5 of my Star Trek TOS timeline series of videos. In this video, I'll be covering the period from 2264 AD to 2269 AD. This covers the timeline during the Enterprise 5-year mission. I'll add a few events after this date, events only contained in TOS. To assist viewers to verify if my timeline interpretation is correct, I provide information which can allow viewers to identify the episode the critical information is contained in. A full description of this information is found in part 1 of this video series, but this key should be adequate. When Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek back in 1966, he had a vision which remained basically consistent over the following 3 years. The animated series and early movies retained this consistency in the most part. When The Next Generation was released in 1987, Gene's vision had changed and the past needed to change in order to be consistent with this new vision. This video series will look at the original vision of Star Trek. Okuda estimates Kirk's 5-year mission lasts from 2264 to, let's say, 2269 or 67, based on the assumption that the original series is set exactly 300 years after its original broadcast. This represents a 2-year difference in the numbers that I'm using because the assumption that Okuda made was the episode started in the 3rd year of the mission, not the 1st, which is what I'm assuming. The mission years may have spanned years, so the 1st year probably began, let's say, in September 2264 and ended in September 2265. Thus, the 5th year may have ended in 2270, which is implied in the Enterprise TV series. For simplicity, I'll assume the mission was based on calendar years. Going back to the dates, Gene Roddenberry's concept, discussed in The Making of Star Trek by Roddenberry and Stephen Wilford in 1991, was that Star Trek's first season takes place after the mission had been underway for some time. The issue with this is that it causes too many issues with other dates in the episode, such as, for example, Spock's relationship with Leela. I've assumed the Okura dates are correct, which means the mission will now start 298 years after the broadcast date. The only difference is I'm assuming that the episodes start with year 1, not year 3. This allows us to assume the animated series covers the last 2 years of the 5-year mission. However, this is not the reason why I have selected a 298 year after broadcast date. It's just a useful side effect. I selected this date because there are simply too many problems with going with Gene's comments that he made in 1991. In the episode This Side of Paradise, Spock is spending time with Leela 6 years prior to the 1st year of the Kirk mission, which implies he went on a 5-year mission with Pike before he joined Kirk, and is on the 1st year of a 5-year mission with Kirk. While there is some evidence to support the episodes start in the 1st year or the 3rd year, I will assume the 3 seasons represent the first 3 years, and the animated series the last 2 years. Look, this may not be correct, but for our purposes, it's the simplest guess. The statement which gives us the 3rd year theory was made in 1991 and was many years after the original series was shown. And Gene had actually already changed his vision of the Star Trek Enterprise or universe at that particular point in time. So this statement made in 1991 may not actually reflect what he had in his mind in 1964, for example, or 66, I should say. Khan's DY-100 class spaceship is probably located between 67 and 134 light years from Earth when it was found in 2264. Kirk leaves the genetically altered Superman on Ceti Alpha, which is an uninhabited planet within Federation space. It's not suitable for colonisation, and based on the earlier comments about Earthships not travelling in this space for a year, this may represent an uninhabited gap in the Federation space. In the episode The Corbomite Manoeuvre, we are introduced to the First Federation and the flagship Fesarius and its commander Baylock in 2264. In Balance of Terror, we discover Romulan ships from the past wars are described as follows. They are painted like giant birds of prey. We're informed about an invisibility capacity for the Romulan ships, or cloaking, by Spock. Invisibility is theoretically possible, Captain, with selective bending of light, but the power cost is enormous. This was previously unknown by the Federation, so it presents a new technology. The ship is using impulse power, but may not be impulse drive. However, I suspect if it's using impulse power, it's also using impulse drive. Scott states, no question, their power is simple impulse. The ship is the flagship of the Praetor's fleet. One definition of Praetor is the commander of the army, so this could mean this is the flagship of the entire Romulan fleet and represents the peak of their technology. In the episode Arena, a new advanced race is now contacted in 2264. The name of this race is the Gorn. The Klingon Empire attacks the Federation in 2264, with their first objective being Organia, a critical planet between the two sides. The Enterprise is attacked by a Klingon spacecraft, but this must have been a much weaker and smaller craft, perhaps half the combat capability of the Enterprise. The Klingon spacecraft is destroyed. The Federation fleet of probably 8 capital ships meets the Klingon fleet of possibly 8 capital ships at Organia. The war is ended by the Organians. The Federation must have been engaged in a cold war with the Klingons, probably affecting the economy of the Klingons. The Klingons boast they will invade and may have previously attacked the Federation at various times. In summary, the Federation has a superior economy and the Klingons have a major focus on their military, which compensates for their economic weakness. The parallel seems like possibly Japan and US in 1941, or even the Western or US and USSR in 1980. In the episode The Day of the Dove, we discover a peace treaty has been placed for 3 years between the Romulans the Klingons and the Federation. The last war, which was stopped by an alien race in 2264, was 2 years ago. I suspect an error factor of 1 year is reasonable. It's almost certainly this is the treaty that the Organians forced both sides to adopt. After the Organians stopped the war between the Federation and Klingons in 2264, a treaty was signed. The treaty was probably only called the Organian Treaty because the Organians stopped the war, not because the Organians were involved in the negotiation. It seems to allow for disputed planets to be claimed by either side, or the side who could develop it most effectively, and seem to restrict claiming planets with other races on them. In the episode, The City on the Edge of Forever, the Enterprise discovers the Guardian of Forever planet. After determining the Guardian represents a major risk, Kirk probably advises Starfleet to hide its location. I strongly suspect the Guardian was the cause of the civilization on the same planet collapsing. It could thus represent some type of great filter, that's a Fermi great filter, and needs to be avoided at all costs. The Prime Directive is first mentioned in 2265. The Prime Directive was not in effect in 2165, we know that for certain. The year it came into force is unknown, but it could have been put in place as late as 2245 or even later, as the Enterprise had no issues interfering with the Organians. I suspect, however, it was probably around about 2245. In 2265, negotiations at the planetoid Babel is conducted to discuss something called the Coridan question. This involves a host of Federation and possibly non-Federation races. There are 114 delegates aboard for 2 weeks, 32 of them are ambassadors. Each ambassador must represent an independent or non-human Federation planet. I suspect most were non-human Federation planets, as the Vulcans were involved. At one stage, it's mentioned the Enterprise was carrying Federation passengers, which could mean all the delegates were from the Federation. If correct, there may be at least 32 non-human races in the Federation. The Coridan question is negotiations to determine if the Coridan system will join the Federation. There is more than one planet in the system, assumed to orbit a single star called Coridan. Some of the planets have mining occurring on them. In the episode By Any Other Name, we discover the Andromeda Galaxy is dominated by the Kelvan Empire, which had sent an expedition to the Milky Way. They may have left 300 years prior, or basically 1965. This is based on the estimated length of time to go back. An interesting coincidence. The alien race is very unlike humans, so probably has nothing to do with the civilization destroyed 500,000 years ago in Andromeda by some type of supernova. Perhaps a supernova, which blew up 500,000 years ago, has something to do with the rising radiation, which is causing the Kelvan Empire so many problems. I doubt it, but you never know. In the episode The Tholian Web, a Federation starship called Defiant is mentioned and has been missing for 2 weeks. This appears to be a sister ship to the Enterprise, and at the end of the episode it's discovered that this ship is lost. with all hands. In the Tholian web, we get the first mention of this race. The Federation must have known them earlier. This is another alien race, in the case of the Tholian Assembly. This is probably a multi-planet political unit consisting of a single race. It seems the Federation is aware of this due to the comment, the traditional punctuality of the Tholians. I'm not going to research anything in detail beyond 2269, unless those sources reference an event before 2270 and does not conflict with the current timeline. The only other exception is when my TOS references a future date, which is what I'll be going through now. The Organians claim the Federation and Klingons will become friends in the future. In the alternate evil universe, the Empire, the Terran Empire, will fall by 2505, or at least that is when there is a galactic revolt, which I presume will cause it to fall. And so, with profound sadness, we come to the end of my Part 5 of my Star Trek TOS timeline series of videos, in this case covering everything from 2264 to 2269. The episode scripts can be found using the URL shown. Alle guten Dingen kommen zu einem Ende.